As the race for the Republican nomination heats up, there is one candidate who has been largely ignored by the mainstream media. Shame on us. He deserves more attention from us than he's getting. Ron Paul makes a lot of sense, and more people ought to listen to him. The Texas congressman has visionary ideas about where the country ought to be going and what sea changes are necessary in order for the U.S. to continue being a superpower. When Ron Paul ran for the Republican nomination in 2008, he talked about the economy imploding, the untenable nature of the national debt, the eventual destruction of our currency, and the limited role for government. He showed tremendous fundraising ability and had an absolutely rabid base of support. Problem was, it was too small. In the 4 years since then, a lot of the things Ron Paul warned us about have happened. We're deeper in debt, a lot deeper. The dollar is worth quite a bit less. The federal government increasingly dysfunctional, and the country is more divided maybe than at any time since the Civil War. Yes, Ron Paul is a conservative, but he's not one of those who goes around hitting people over the head with his Bible. And looking at the current batch of Republican wannabes, especially in light of some of the stuff that's come out of Michelle Bachmann and Rick Perry's mouth in the last 24 hours, Ron Paul stands out as maybe the only adult in the room.
Yes, you mentioned the word change, and when I bought your book, I mean, that was the question I have. I mean, we've been hearing change from Obama. If you could confront Mr. Obama tomorrow, how would you pin him down when he uses that word change?
Well, I probably wouldn't do it directly as much as I would go to his supporter if I was addressing supporters of the audience. That change means nothing. It's just a word, and it's a cliche. And just to repeat it has no meaning. You have to say, what are you going to change? And I would argue, you offer no change. You have the same foreign policy. You want more troops in Afghanistan. You're not talking about only going to war with a declaration. You don't want to deal with the monetary, financial crisis in this country. You want to keep, you know, the system together for the benefit of the banks and the big corporations and the politicians, you know, that argument. And what kind of change do you have on social policy? Do you care about sick people using marijuana? I mean, have you come out for that? You know, and I would just hit him hard on the fact that he doesn't want change, he wants the status quo. And just saying it means nothing, but he has a lot of supporters. And the one time I was asked to comment about him, I actually tried to be, you know, fairly soft on him, but concluded that we have a lot of differences. But I tried to acknowledge that his supporters and my supporters have a lot of overlap, and they do. So in declaring what I just said, I think it has to be done in somewhat of a diplomatic manner, and then to appeal to reason and say, look, if you want change, what you need is somebody that's going to make sure you're never going to have a draft, that we're going to bring our troops on, we're going to balance the budget, we're going to have sound money. He never talks about any of that. Well, no, he probably doesn't have real solid beliefs. He will be converted when we convert his young people. That's what will convert. The politicians in Washington don't have much philosophy, probably never will, but that's all right. That's why we have a chance by converting people's hearts and minds, and that's where we've made our progress.
In politics, just like in life, it's often the timing that makes the difference. In the case of Ron Paul, it seems events over the last 4 years have finally caught up with the candidate. Paul's message hasn't changed, but the urgency of what he's saying has increased dramatically. And it seems like this time, more people may be listening.
He won the New Hampshire Young Republican straw poll. And last week, he was just 152 votes behind Michelle Bachmann in the Ames, Iowa straw poll.
He came within an eyelash of finishing first in the Iowa straw poll, less than 200 votes behind Michelle Bachmann out of nearly 17,000 votes cast. Again, a fact that was largely overlooked by the mainstream media.
You know who's interesting to me is Paul. Paul's doing very well out in Iowa, and I don't think that's going to thrill a lot of the Republican establishment.
There's one other candidate who you might have noticed. Well, I don't know if you're watching the mainstream media. You might not have noticed that he was omitted from that list. Let's see, how much did Ron Paul get in this last quarter from active duty military? Oh my gosh, $36,739.79. No surprise, actually, that this was the case, far outstripping all other Republican presidential candidates put together, as was the case 4 years ago. But let's see, let's compare this to, who's the other guy running for president in 2012? Oh yeah, $28,833.99 for the president himself.
Congressman, what specific things would you do as president to increase growth, calm the markets, create jobs that could pass through a divided Congress?
Well, they didn't downgrade it mainly because they couldn't come to a conclusion. They couldn't come to a conclusion because they didn't know what was going on. The country's bankrupt and nobody wanted to admit it. And when you're bankrupt, you can't keep spending. And all these proposed cuts weren't cuts at all. What you have to do is restore sound money. You have to understand why you have a business cycle, why you have booms and busts. If you don't do that, there's no way you can solve this problem. And the booms and busts comes from a failed monetary system. The interest rates that are way lower than they should be encourages malinvestment and debt. And to get out of that, all this other tinkering, you cannot do that unless you liquidate debt. You don't bail out the people that are bankrupt and dump the debt on the people. That is what's happening. So you have to allow liquidation of debt, eliminate the malinvestment, then you go back and you can get growth again by having a better tax structure, lower taxes, invite capital back into this country, get a lot less regulations, and under those conditions you can have growth again.
And Congressman Paul, you say that President Obama is not too soft on Iran. You say that he is too tough on Iran. I want to put up some of your statements. Sanctions are not diplomacy, you say. They are a precursor to war and an embarrassment to a country that pays lip service to free trade. As for Iran's nuclear ambitions, you wrote this: one can understand why they might want to become nuclear capable, if only to defend themselves and to be treated more respectfully. Is that your policy towards Iran?
Well, even our own CIA gives me this information that they have no evidence that they're working on a weapon. Just think of what we went through in the Cold War. When I was in the Air Force, after I was drafted in the Air Force, all through the 60s, we were standing up against the Soviets. They had like 30,000 nuclear weapons with intercontinental missiles. Just think of the agitation and the worrying of a country that might get a nuclear weapon someday, and just think of how many nuclear weapons surround Iran. The Chinese are there, the Indians are there, the Pakistanis are there, the Israelis are there, the United States is there. All these countries, China has nuclear weapons. Why wouldn't it be natural that they might want a weapon? There'd be, internationally, they'd be given more respect. Why should we write people off? There was, you know, in the 50s, we at least talked to them. At least our leaders and Reagan talked to the Soviets. What's so terribly bad about this? And people, countries that you put sanctions on, you are more likely to fight them. I say a policy of peace is free trade, stay out of their internal business, don't get involved in these wars, and just bring our troops home.
The Iranians are the existential threat to the state of Israel. You ask the Israelis, what keeps them up at night? It's the Iranians funding of Hamas and Hezbollah and the support of Syria.
30 seconds.
And the reason, hold on, let me finish.
The senator is wrong on his history. We've been at war in Iran for a lot longer than 79. We started it in 1953 when we sent in a coup, installed the Shah, and the reaction, the blowback came in 1979. It's been going on and on because we just plain don't mind our own business. That's our problem.
And I can tell you, if Rick Santorum and when Rick Santorum is president, Iran will not get a nuclear weapon because the world as we know it will be no more.
Congressman Paul, 30 seconds.
You've heard the war propaganda that is liable to lead us into the sixth war, and I worry about that position. Iran is a threat because they have some militants there. But But believe me, they're all around the world, and they're all around the world, and they're not a whole lot different than others. Iran does not have an air force that can come here. They can't even make enough gasoline for themselves. And here we are, building this case out. Please. They're building up this case just like we did in Iraq. Build up the war propaganda. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq, and they had nuclear weapons, and we had to go in. I'm sure you supported that war as well. Okay. It's time we quit this. It's time. It's trillions of dollars we're spending on these wars.
I really get a kick out of Ron Paul. I really like a lot of what he says. You can't like everything, but I like a lot of what he says. I think he's going to have a hard time, but I sort of, really understand a lot of what he's saying. And a lot of what he's saying is not incorrect.
And at the risk of going over our time, I just want to say, having campaigned during the last presidential election, you had the most enthusiastic supporters of anybody I ever saw.
I'd love to hear that.
Well, I mean, my goodness, everywhere I went, they were literally running down highways holding your signs. Now, I've never had a chance to tell you that, but your message obviously resonated with a lot of people.
Thank you.
You're going to encourage him.
I've been in politics for 35 years. My cause has been the cause of liberty. And I am convinced that liberty does not come from our government, but it comes from our Creator. And our goal should be peace and prosperity. It is under the principles of liberty that you have the greatest chance of achieving peace and prosperity. That is why I am so down on these wars that is costing us trillions of dollars, why we have to reform the monetary system, why we need honest money, a gold standard and not paper money out of the Federal Reserve System. But also we need to change the environment for our businesses. We need to lower the regulations and the taxes and private property rights and contract rights. Then we can achieve peace and real prosperity.
I firmly believe now that our day is coming. We got to get the truth out. That is what we need. Ideas spread. They can't stop them. An idea whose time has come cannot be stopped by any army or any government.